Hey guys, welcome back to BankU's Regulatory Deep Dives, where we take various sustainability regulations around the globe that are affecting corporations, both locally and globally, and kind of demystify them and pull them apart. Hopefully these are really helpful. If you ever have any questions, comments, feedback, ideas for future videos, feel free to comment and we will do our best to respond and hopefully create something really worthwhile out of it. Today we're going to be chatting about circularity in plastics. So the agenda for that is going to look like tackling what global EPR regulations are around the globe. So we'll just look at what are the top extended producer responsibility regulations to know. We'll also go into the UK plastic packaging tax, how that affects companies, what that means. We will link in resources for you guys to stay up to date and learn more about EPR and circularity regulations. That will be in the description. And then last but certainly not least, we'll dive into some case studies. So some real world examples of companies that are doing a great job of promoting circularity within their operations and production, and also ensuring that they comply with local regulations. So before we get started and really dive into things, just wanted to talk about what circularity is. I think a lot of times in the sustainability industry, the regulatory industry, there's so much jargon that just gets tossed around, and sometimes we need to get on the same page about it. So essentially, in a nutshell, what circularity means is instead of just wasting waste, we're transforming waste. So in economics, circularity means like you're taking a product or resource, right, and making like renewing or reusing it again in a regenerative way, rather than it just going to waste. When you hear people talk about a circular economy, that's when, hey, in this economy, when a product or resource is used, produced, created, then it is also ultimately recycled, composted, or reused in a way that allows it to continually have these like new life cycles within a supply chain, within the economy, right? And so instead of having like a waste economy, an overproduction economy, it's a circular economy. And yes, please enjoy my little homemade cartoons and conversations, because gotta keep decks interesting. A lot of regulations as we know them today deal in like plastic and packaging. The reason for that being is that plastic especially is driving waste in our world, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon, right? Plastic is everywhere, from straws to cups to packaging, right? Like, it's no secret or surprise that plastic is an issue. As is, I would say, secondary to that is just general packaging, such as like cardboard, paper-based packaging, and clothing, textile waste. But we'll cover that more in another video when we dive into sustainable fashion regulations. So a couple alarming stats. According to the World Bank, solid waste production reached 2.24 billion tons in 2020, and it's projected to surge by 73% by 2050, which is wild. About 1/3 of the world's plastic is used in packaging, of course. For those of you not familiar, sorry to introduce this to you, but the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a giant garbage patch that floats between Hawaii and California. Love living in the good old US of A. It is twice the size of Texas. And again, for those not familiar, Texas is huge. And it's just there. Like, people joke about living on it, building houses on it. Like, it's giant. And it's kind of in no man's land. No one's really taking care of it. It's an issue, especially since we all have a lot of life and world to live still. Of all the tons of plastic waste produced over the last 7 decades, only 9% has been recycled and another 12% incinerated, which can have its own set of issues. I really loved this quote by Inger Anderson, the executive director of the UN Environment Program. He says, "Plastic has been the default option in design for too long. It is time to redesign products to use less plastic, particularly unnecessarily, or unnecessary and problematic plastics, to redesign product packaging and shipping to use less plastic, to redesign systems and products for reuse and recyclability. So that, I think these two slides where we kind of talked about the definition of circularity and then the role of plastic and waste, at the heart of it is, or that's what's at the heart of driving these extended producer responsibility regulations and recycling or circularity regulations. So when it comes to EPR, extended producer responsibility, it's a means to take the responsibility of recycling and renewing waste from the consumer to the brand or producer of that waste. So instead of saying like all the time, okay, consumers need to reduce, reuse, recycle, consumers need to be paying for this, consumers need to be handling this, that's all great and good, but it is a drop in the bucket when these corporations continue to not only produce so people can consume, but also it's like once it leaves their hands, once it's purchased, it's out of sight, out of mind for them. And so EPR is a really, really cool regulation that is starting to be adopted from, states and countries around the world to ensure that, hey, as this shark is saying, say no to big plastic, right? Like it is not the consumer's responsibility at the end of the day to make sure the economy is circular. It is corporations, it is governments, right? It is communities to a certain extent to kind of support that, but it's really up to the producers of said plastic packaging, clothing, etc., which I think is really cool. Here's a snapshot. I would recommend screenshotting this because we're not going to go through everything, but here's a snapshot of major global EPR regulations around the world. So I would say the really big ones that we'll probably start hearing a lot about is the ones in the EU. So the Packaging Waste Directive, the Textile EPR scheme, and then NEMWA in South Africa. Like the world has a lot to learn from how South Africa handles EPR. So if you're really interested in learning more, don't have time to read up on all of these, those are the three I would recommend looking at. But as you can see, it's really starting to pick up around the globe as everyone realizes like, hey, waste is an issue and we have to do something about it if we don't want to just live on a giant ocean garbage patch one day. The UK plastic packaging tax is also a really interesting example. I would also recommend screenshotting this if you'd like to read more, but it is also an example of an initiative to start encouraging more renewable resources and recycled content. So essentially what the UK is doing is encouraging businesses to replace virgin plastic or like net new plastic with recycled plastic. And there are basic taxes you have to pay if you don't do it, but then also tax benefits if you do it, which I think is really amazing. So yeah, these two slides are meant to be screenshotted, meant to be referred to. If you feel like anything's missing here or incorrect, feel free to comment. Always open to learnings and suggestions. Next, we're going to dive into a couple examples of BankU clients that are making waves in circularity and showing, hey, it can be done. Corporations can really get behind circularity and take on some of the responsibility that we have historically been putting on consumers that frankly has not been working. This is Dow. I'm going to say this about all three, but all three of these are some amazing case studies. But essentially, Dow wanted to ensure that they could formalize the waste picking sector in Colombia while also getting the materials they needed in order to like produce more recycled materials. So I think it's really, really cool, like the amount of transparency and numbers they have behind this initiative to show like, hey, what we're doing is not only changing people's lives. So in some economies, not necessarily the US, but in a lot of economies around the world, waste picking is a job. It's a sector. And it's very informal in a lot of places. And so groups like Dow, or as we'll see, Project Up in South Africa, they're not only trying to get the waste tracked and picked up and reused, they're also trying to make sure like, hey, the people picking up the waste, taking it to these centers, making sure it's, out of the streets and into a new bottle, they deserve to be recognized, paid fairly, treated well. Another great example is Tidy. They focus on ocean-bound plastics and getting plastics that would have otherwise ended up in the ocean and getting credits for those. So since using BankU's platform, they've really been able to not only increase the amount of plastic they've collected, but they've also been able to increase the amount of revenue they've gotten from said plastic credits to kind of prove that circularity initiative, as well as registering those waste collectors. And then last but certainly not least, Project Up in South Africa. They, similar to the past two that you've seen, they've made sure that, hey, we can digitize this process so we can really formalize circularity and not just say like, hey, consumers, please recycle. We can say Petco, Coca-Cola Foundation, powered by BankU, is ensuring like, hey, this plastic is being recycled. We can prove it. And we're also ensuring that we're empowering those waste collectors as well. That's all we have for today. Hope this was really informative. Again, we'll include some links in the description to more resources. Those 3 case studies can be found on BankU's website. Feel free to check us out and definitely let us know if you have any questions. Have a good day. See ya.